really pleased to have Andrew Smith here with us this evening on Campfire Tales. Andy and I go back quite a long way now. I haven't counted the years because it might be a bit scary, but his hair's got longer and mine's got shorter over the years. But
grateful you've got some.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's grown back. So Andy and I have a mutual friend called Greg Hughes, who's a Cape Town guide, who many of us know from Botswana. And Greg, I was on a safari with Greg once, probably 15 years ago, I think. And he said to me, and I was talking about Zimbabwe, and I felt like I'd visited lots of places in Zimbabwe, I'd seen most of it. And he said, no, there's a place you've never been to. And it's at Rhino Pools. And I said, no, I've been to Rhino Pools. I've been to Rakomachi quite often and other places. And Rhino Pools has got a reputation for walking safaris. It's changed slightly recently, and Andy can fill us in on that. But it's this place where you're allowed to walk pretty much at will, on your own and without a guide. And you can do this incredible thing there where you can also go down the Zambezi in canoes and camp every night for 5 nights, and you do 100 kilometers of river frontage, and it's just the most amazing place. So, and I'd done all of that. And this guy had said to me, but you should go and meet Andy because he'll take you to a place called Tataki Springs. And I'd never heard of it, rather to my surprise. And he said it's a sort of a slightly unknown part of Rhino Pools. It's in the back country of Rhino Pools. It's up against the escarpment. And there's a river there called the Tataki River. It's a spring. And there are only a few campsites there, but it's full of wildlife. And it's difficult to get in. There's limited access there. And at that time, there were no lodges there either. There is one now there in that area called Kavinga. And so I got hold of Andy and I said, I think this Hughes guy must be telling me lies because I thought I'd been to pretty much everywhere in Zimbabwe. And he said, no, listen, this is a place that you want to visit. And so I set up a trip with some clients and we went to Tataki, and it absolutely blew my mind. It was one of the most significant wildlife experiences I'd ever had, being on foot with wildlife, but in a very different way. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit later this evening. And Andy is, I wouldn't say, Andy, you're a Rhino Pool specialist, but because I've also walked with you in Ghana Resort, Matusa Donna, and Hwangi, and many other places. Yeah. But Andy is certainly specializes in walking safaris, and particularly in making approaches to wild animals on foot, including lions and buffaloes and elephants, and in an ethical and sustainable way. If it wasn't sustainable, he wouldn't be sitting here. And
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and although we've had a few close calls, it's a very, very exciting way of going on safari. Not typically your first experience of safari, although for some people it is. And so it really changed the way I felt about doing safaris. Now, I've got a client who is in Switzerland, who's traveled with me for 13 years. It would have been 14, of course, but this year it didn't happen. He's an industrialist there, and he and his wife, he's in his 70s now, and he and his wife walk with me on safari every single year in May, the last 2 weeks of every May. And the first week, or rather the third week of May, we go somewhere, sometimes South Africa. We've walked in Zambia, Botswana several times, often in Namibia. And then the second week, we almost always go to Zimbabwe and we walk with Andy. And Andy sets up a walk for us. And we don't always go to Tataki, but we frequently do. I'd say every second year at least. It's a very hard place to stay away from. So I want to talk about, and Andy's going to talk about Tataki. I don't want to steal his thunder because that's his territory, but I've got a very strong love for that area. So this particular client, his name is Charlie and his wife is called Lily, have been with me on many safaris. And I thought I'd just start off by telling a little story about something that happened with me and them, but in Namibia. And then we can move on to onto Zim, and we'll talk about some shared experiences there. just so that you know, before we get going, I'm working hard on creating the audio version of Confessions of an African Safari Guide. I'm about a third of the way through that. And Africa Bites is all done. But unfortunately, Amazon claim they need 30 working days before they can release it. And so it's in that period now. So I'm hoping it'll be live in maybe 2 weeks or so. And then also the Kindle version of Confessions. We haven't, well, to be honest, I haven't even started working on that one, but it's certainly in the pipeline. So keeping busy during the age of COVID. And then just lastly, before we really start, in terms of safaris going forward, and Andy might have a slightly different view on this, but there's lots of guides here this evening. It doesn't look like there's going to be much African safari, at least, or Southern African safari, certainly, at least until about October. We all know the limitations of that, and it's very, very hard to get a real firm grip on which airlines are flying and whether there's a quarantine process when you get to the country and then when you get back home again, and all the many limitations involved with learning to deal with a new viral phenomenon. So it's all very uncertain, and basically there is no African safari except possibly internal, and even that's quite limited. So we're all biding our time. I'm certainly missing Africa unbelievably, because this is normally the time I'm there. But this is one way of filling in that gap, is meeting with safari friends and clients and talking about Africa, which I think is really, really important. So let me kick off with the story this evening with Charlie and Lily. Now, one of the walks that I've done with them on 3 separate occasions is it's a magnificent event, and it's a camel safari in Namibia. And we walk for 7 days, 7 nights. And we start sort of in the middle of Namibia, up sort of halfway up the country. If you know Namibia, it's a place called Palembang, or Palembang Concession. It's an enormous piece of land. And it's wild country, totally undeveloped, just like wilderness should be, the places we seek out as guides. And there are some very small camps there, tented camps, fairly rudimentary, and we don't even use those. We sleep in little tents on the ground. Now, that's not how we do most of our safaris. Most of our safaris are pretty comfortable, actually. But with this particular client and his wife and his kids and his friends, we do a simple walking safari. And the way we did it was we wanted to get to the coast, to the Atlantic Ocean, and it was about 150 kilometers of walking. So approximately 100 miles or so. And we started in the middle of the country and we went west all the way to the sea. And you can't even get Land Rovers in there. The only way you can get to the coast, to a little airstrip where a small Cessna 206 can pick you up, is by walking. And the only way that you can get your kit along with you is by using camels. The Germans colonized Namibia in 1884, and they were there until 1915. And they brought in camels so that they could use them for police patrols in that area. At that time, it was the wild frontier. And those camels still live there, and they've bred, and they live in the wild. And some of them have been domesticated, and the guys don't ride them, but they use them to carry everything. So those camels had all our kit, our water, our food, our camping equipment, absolutely everything we needed for a week. And they're the most remarkable creatures. And when you hear about camels and the fact that they don't drink, it's literally true. They drank at the start of the safari, they walked for a week, and each night we'd camp at a spring, a freshwater spring, beautiful potable water. And those camels completely ignored that water, ignored it completely, never drank once. But when we finally got to the coast a week later, the water that they drank was that brackish sort of salty water where the seawater rushes up over the beach and mixes with river water. That's the water they drank. And they drank that until, like, for 15 or 20 minutes until they were full, and then they went back. So that was our means of transport. And on the way, we're doing a Rhino Patrol. This area is absolutely thick with wildlife, including black rhinos, and they're highly endangered. And there's a subspecies there, Bicornus bicornus, and there's a strong population of them. And the Save the Rhino Trust, SRT, to whom these camels belong, are the guys who count them and monitor them and take GPS readings and photographs of them. And so our walk to the coast over a week was actually part of a Rhino Patrol. So that's just to set the scene. Now, at nighttime, you're sleeping in small tents, you've got a fire burning, and there's lions there, and elephants, of course, and hyenas. And so you need to be somewhat careful. Not that we ever felt afraid, but there's always potential danger. And so to make sure, now the problem is that lions are hungry creatures, right? And they don't only eat springbuck and gemsbok and mountain zebras. They will eat pretty much anything that is fleshy and bloody with great relish, including camels, right? And camels, not part of the traditional diet, but lions don't know that. And so the way you keep the camels safe is you take a donkey with you and you take a dog. And so the Save the Rhino guy, lazy bugger, while we were walking, he rode on his donkey. None of us rode on the camels. And then there was also a dog, a really scabby looking thing. You know, it looked to me like it was close to death, but that's the way they always look there. And both of those were early warning systems for lions. Apparently, donkeys and dogs are able to detect lions long before humans are. Anyway, so we did this walk. We did it 3 times, actually. But on this particular occasion, no harm befell us. We got slightly sunburned and slightly thirsty, and we had a wonderful walk, and we saw lots of wildlife. But there is an element of peril to the story and it's unexpected. Because as it turned out, the most dangerous animal that we encountered on that safari was none of those. It was actually domestic cattle, cows. And the way that happened was this. We finished our safari at a little village called Puros. It's a nowhere town. A little bottle store there in a small village. It's just a small village, and it's full of Himba people. And they literally like wear skins up there in that corner of Namibia. They are that unsophisticated, the women particularly. And so it's a dusty airstrip. And the pilot landed, and I noticed when he landed, he came to fetch us on time. And when he landed, he disappeared sort of over a slope, and the plane disappeared down the slope. And I thought that was a little bit odd, but he turned around and taxied back towards us. And we were waiting there, and we piled in. And it's a Cessna 206, which is this little aeroplane, a real workhorse of the bush. Very uncomfortable things, but incredible machines. They're sort of like Toyota Hiluxes. They're the choice of vehicle in the bush because they just keep on going without breaking down. And that's what a 206 is. It just keeps on going. You can stuff it full of everything. You can overload it, and it takes off and lands. And it really feels like flying in a 206, especially on a hot day, because it bumps around. And for some people, it's pretty scary. It's the scariest part of the safari. So the pilot comes along and he stops the plane, and we jam all the luggage in. And he says to us, and we get in, and he says, listen, now we're moving on to actually go and join Andy in Zimbabwe. And it's a long flight. So, and it's hot as well. And if you're taking off in the middle of the day, the air is thin. And so the plane doesn't fly as easily as if it's cold in the morning when the air is thicker, because it gets more purchase. And so he says, look, the runway is quite short, but this particular runway is a bit unique because it's got a bump in it, as you saw. So we're going to actually take off twice. So we'll go hammering down the runway, and then we'll go off that bump you can see, but we won't be going fast enough. So we'll still be under full power, and we're going to land, and we're going to keep running just for a short while, and then we'll have enough speed, and then we'll take off, and we'll slowly climb towards those mountains, and I'll go around behind that mountain, and we'll make our way towards the airport and ultimately to Zimbabwe. So it all sounded a bit dodgy. But these pilots are incredible. They're absolutely amazing. And by the way, almost every pilot you've ever flown on Emirates or BA or South African Airways, when it used to fly, and all of those other major airlines, those guys come from bush backgrounds, lots of them. They start off flying these little aeroplanes so they can build up their hours to get to a twin engine, and from there to a small jet, and from there it just gets bigger and bigger. So those guys, although they fly by wire now, actually really do know how to fly an aeroplane. And they start off like this in these bush planes. So we get in, and he gets that thing revved up, and he's got the brakes on full, And the plane is shaking in place, and he lets the brakes go, and we go flying down the runway. And just as he predicted, we take off the bump. And we know now we're going to land again. But as we went off the bump, and as we started to come down, to touch down again, at exactly the place where we were supposed to do that, was a herd of cows standing in the middle of the runway. And they had drifted in from the river, and we couldn't see them because of this bump. And now standard procedure was that the guide that is supposed to drive down the runway and clear away any animals and make sure. But the problem is he had done that and come back again, and the cows had drifted in while we weren't watching. Now, when that happens, you know, your life does flash before you. You think, well, this is weird. You know, we've just been walking with elephants and lions and etc., and nothing befell us, and now we're going to, you know, hit a bloody cow. And when you hit a cow at that speed, everything gets hurt. But this pilot, you know, testimony to these guys' training, it was the most remarkable thing. Because as we dropped, there were about 6 cows, about, I'd say 3 on each side. And as we dropped down towards them, this guy flicked the left-hand wing up, the port wing, and he picked the wing up, and he literally picked the wing up over the cow, and we touched down and bounced, and then the right wing picked up, and that went over 3 more cows, literally underneath the wing, right past us here, and down the runway, at which point he hit the brakes, and we went clean off the runway, and we went across a gravel road, and went into the bushes and into thick sand and stopped. And there was this, and none of this was luck or a miracle. This guy was incredible. I mean, he literally saved our lives that day. But what I remember most was we came to a stop, and this little singular bead of sweat ran from beneath his cap, just ran down his cheek like this, just one. And I know that guy was pooping himself. but he really held it together, because he said, okay, everybody, let's try that again, shall we? But we had to get out of the plane and literally push it out of the sand, like, you know, pushing a stuck Land Rover, and shoved it out back onto the runway, got in, taxied all the way back up. Now the guide's still standing there. And while we were waiting, he'd been offering us beers to drink. And we said, no, you know, waiting for the plane to arrive. We said, no, it's fine. You know, we'll drink this evening when we get to Serika or to Zimbabwe, sundowners. So, but when we stopped there and got and turned around ready to go, Charlie, and he's Swiss and he does love a beer, he starts banging on the perspex, bang, bang, bang. He's like, wait. And the guy comes over and says, now I need a beer. Give me a beer now. Now I'll take the beer. And so we took off and we continued with our safari. So that is one of the closest calls I've ever had on safari, not at the hands of a wild animal, but simply a domestic cow. Now I want to move the story to Zimbabwe and hand over to Andy. Because as I said, I painted the picture about Tataki, and I'd like him to tell us more about his playground and to tell us about a movie that he helped to make called Predator's Playground. Over to you, Andy.
Right, thanks, Lloyd. Yeah, I mean, I remember that story very well. And in fact, that very day, I think was potentially the first time you had joined me on safari, and you guys there'd been a time zone issue, hadn't quite factored in the 2 hours difference, flying all the way from the coast, coming right into the central part of Southern Africa. And I remember sitting at the airstrip at Kavinga. They hadn't opened yet, but we were sitting there. It opened the airfield, and I was waiting for this caravan, because by then you'd changed to a caravan with the whole group. And I remember, and it was starting to get to sunset, and eventually I just saw that landing light come over the escarpment in the distance, and I was just like, whoosh. And then I remember when you guys were arrived, you were like, yeah, beer time. I remember that story very, very well. So to continue on to the little adventures that we've done in that little place called Tataki, and I say little in the fact that it's a very fragile environment that we as guides are very privileged to operate in. And I in particular really love it, because it's quite a, when I explain it to guests, even when we're there, it's I liken it to being inside a National Geographic documentary, but you're on foot, and you're immersed in wildlife and any experience at any time, and that place never ever sleeps. And it's quite amazing in the fact that it can be quiet for a day, and then suddenly all hell will break loose. And that's why it's such a special place, and you can see it's obviously touched Lloyd's heart quite fondly there. So what we've done with these safaris is I'd organized for us to land there, and what we'd do then is that we'd spend the night at Kavinga first, and then it was about a 12-kilometer walk from this little area across to Tataki Springs. So we did a nice walk the next morning with the group, getting everybody into the swing of things, just to see how everybody sits in and deals with the walking. A little bit of a change environment for obviously walking in the desert sort of areas to the bush now. And yeah, we head across to Tataki, and then we get to the spring. And yeah, Lloyd, I mean, at the end of the story, you can obviously maybe fill in a little bit, but when you first arrive at Tataki, you go, is this it? Is this all that this place is? It's like not much here. There's like a little bit of water, and it's just a very sandy little riverbed. And then
So the thing about it, Andy, isn't it, is that we normally go to these beautiful lodges with, you know, crisp linen and ice in the drinks, all this thing, and we still do all of that. But when you arrive at Tataki, there's not even a shower. There's no toilets. There's nothing there, which is of course which is 100%. So what we'll do is we'll actually we'll have some crews that will help us set up, and they'll put in a mobile safari for us. So we'll have a nice central dining area. You've got all the sort of modern luxuries with you. We actually put in flush toilets, believe it or not, and bucket showers, hot and cold water, and then 3-course meals. And we do very simple meals and stuff like that. And it's about the wilderness experience, and it's phenomenal. Yeah, we put the camp up for when we have the safari, and then when we leave, absolutely everything goes from there, and there's nothing left behind, nothing at all. So that's what's really unique about the place, is that it's pristine and it's untouched. And it's one of the places that I've been very fortunate to spend probably the last 15 years guiding there, and got to know the place pretty well. During that process of those number of years, I was with some friends, very fortunate to actually film a documentary on the spring. And we did it, I'd say probably traditionally, where it was focused on the resident line in the area. And what we would do is that we would basically go out every morning, wake up at about 4 o'clock, so at first light, hop us 4 or 5 o'clock, go and find fresh tracks, and we would track the line down with cameras and everything else. And we basically followed this line pride on and off for about, in total, it was about 4 years, but the year that I was involved was a year. And we got to know these line pretty well, and we were actually accepted almost by this pride. We used to go and sit with these things in the shade of the bushes, believe it or not. They'd be 10, 15 meters from us. And then we would be able to basically move with the line while they were hunting and walk through the bush with them. And it allows for really close interaction with big game on foot, and in particular lion. And I mean, often we would walk with these lion while they were hunting. You're almost accepted as part of the pride, which is pretty phenomenal, and you're on foot. So that's one of the reasons why Greg introduced Lloyd to myself, was that he said, yeah, you want to go and experience something different, you really need to go and do this. And then that leads on to the safaris that I'll often lead pretty much anywhere in Southern Africa. But Mana, the backcountry, Mana Pools, Kavinga, Tataki, those areas I'm very fond of because of the relationships I have with those areas and the wildlife experiences that I've been able to experience there. And obviously, while we're doing this, it's what you've got to look at as a guide and being on foot is obviously also intruding on wildlife spaces. So you want to be very sensitive to that, and obviously not allow the wildlife to get too familiar with yourself.
Humans, we often get this emotion and we like to get attached to things. So it's quite hard when you're in those areas and you almost feel you spent a lot of time with these predators, especially lion. You think, oh, gee, we could get a little bit closer. We could get a little bit closer. And it's actually good to make sure that you keep those barriers and those boundaries and be respectful. Have your close encounters, but make sure that you back out of that.
And you're going to talk about that phenomenon about how relaxed the animals are there in terms of what.
Yeah, so I'll move on even to like the baboons and stuff like that.
Okay,
yeah,
because that's one of the striking features of that place.
100%. So that allows like a lot of the experiences that you have there, like Lloyd just mentioned now, like the baboon trips that are there. Now, when you're walking, the baboons don't shout at people and they don't react at people walking around. Normally, you go to wildlife areas, often the baboon would, make some sort of gestures or basically shout at humans moving around. They have this imprinted, inherited fear about this bipedal shape, us humans walking around. But there they've learned that humans are not a threat, but they will shout at the lion, which is phenomenal. It's fantastic because that helps you find what you want to be looking for. And the focus there mainly is lion on foot, as well as the big herds of buffalo. But what's really nice, you'll get up your daily routine, you'll get up in the mornings, you'll go and try and track your lion down on foot if you're successful, have those interactions with cats. Then hopefully sort of by 9-10 o'clock, this is a general idea about how a day would run in the dry season. You would have big herds of buffalo then coming into the spring between sort of 9 and 12 o'clock. And there's really nice sort of natural fallen trees and things that you can go and sit in. And I've had some experiences, I'm not sure with you, Lloyd, but it might have been, but I've had up to 1,100 buffalo, over 1,000 buffalo drinking within 10 meters of me at the base of my feet. And we've hidden in these bushes.
You're sitting up in those trees over the water.
Sitting up in the trees overlooking the water. And you literally are only about 3 meters above the back of these buffalo. And there's 400-500. And then, like I said, sometimes I've had 1,000 buffalo in front of you while you're sitting there. And it's just so overwhelming. The dust, the noise, the hitting of the horns, the oxpeckers trying to get ahead of all the dust coming in so they can get a drink without being choked. It's a pretty amazing spectacle that happens. And then what happens, they'll drink, and then that'll often get the lions even excited. If they're sitting on the spring, you can often have them hunting the buffalo in the middle of the day, which is phenomenal because typically cats would hunt at night, talking about most cats in Africa. But obviously they're opportunists, and it's a phenomenal place to be able to experience this. And that led on to why we wanted to do, my friends especially, because that's a couple who did this documentary. That's what led on to them wanting to do this film there, was because of the experiences that you could get on foot and in the daytime, because those are the key things. Getting close and personal, and then obviously in the daytime so you can actually film it and experience it. So then once you've had those kind of experiences for the morning, you would then go back to camp. Normally would do anything from a 7-kilometer to maybe a 13-kilometer walk in the morning. Tracking's the nice thing about what I like of those kind of safaris is that you work for your experiences, and that whole journey of picking up tracks, deciphering what it means, reading that morning newspaper, as a lot of us guides talk about, and working out what's happened the night before, where they've been, what they've been up to, and then, if you're lucky enough, get it fresh enough tracks and follow these things up, and then hopefully find them.
Can I interrupt you briefly there, Andy?
Yeah, sure.
So it makes me think of a morning we had there where the lions were roaring like crazy up at the spring. And the spring itself is only, half a K? No, maybe a K up from the camp, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about 1 kilometer up from the camp.
About a K, where the water rises in this canyon and then seeps down past the camp, which is why all those animals are close by. But, and they were, the roar was echoing in the canyon. And so at 5:30, or as soon as it got light, Andy and I got up and went to try and find them. Everybody else was still in their tents, and one of the young guys came with us. I can't remember who that was. One of the clients, and we tracked them, and in the early light, and we didn't actually have any success. But we knew that we found the tracks of, I think, 1 or 2 females with cubs, if you remember that.
Yeah.
And we knew that these were extremely fresh. and it was still only just getting light, so we were a little bit anxious. Anyway, we ultimately lost the tracks, couldn't find them, and went back to camp so that we could get coffee and have some breakfast and get everybody moving. And I went to the toilet, and it's just right on the edge of camp. And while I was in there, the lions emerged from behind us, the very ones you'd been tracking, a female and her cubs, and they came and they played within 20 meters of the camp in the riverbed, jumping over the water and playing with each other. I think there's one or two adult females. I can't remember now.
Yeah, there was 2 at that stage. I remember there was 2 of them. Yeah.
And cubs, little cubs, just, I don't know, 6 weeks or 2 months old, quite small and very playful. We'd done all this work of tracking, big brave guides going out there getting the job done. Meantime, if we just stayed in bed and got up an hour later and then looked out, opened the zip and looked out the tent, we would have seen them perfectly clearly playing in the riverbed. Yeah. But that's how it goes sometimes. But the point I'm making is that this place was so relaxed that just going about their normal life while we were going about ours, doing it right there. It was at dawn, one of the most. And when those little kittens play with each other and they make that meow, meow noise, talking to their mums, and the mums are going, and calling them, absolutely top-class experience. That's one of the Tataki memories I have.
Yeah.
Back to you, Andy.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I mean, that's what happens in this place. And that's what I was mentioning earlier, is that it can be very quiet one moment and the next thing, suddenly stuff just pops out and starts happening in front of you. And that's what is so spectacular. So yeah, I mean, the thing is that you'd finish those experiences in the day, then you'd be sitting around camp and you think, okay, well, what now? Then what happens is the daily routine of the 3 or 4 different resident troops of baboons in the area start coming down to the spring and walking into the camp and moving around. And if you sit quietly just on the edge of the riverbed, the baboons actually all come in and sit amongst you as people. And you can be immersed in there, like you're wearing this imaginary cloak, and you've got baboons just carrying on their daily life as if you don't even exist. And it's amazing. We've had experiences there where we've left food on the tables, and normally we all know the story. You leave food out, baboons and monkeys will raid your camps and tear everything apart. They don't touch it. In this place, they have never been spoiled by people. And they leave, you can leave food, you can leave whatever you want lying around, and they just do not touch it. And that is amazing. I don't know of any other places, definitely in Zimbabwe, that you can experience and be sat in amongst a baboon troop, totally unaffected. Like, you're not affecting them, and they are basically just coming in and just carrying on with their daily routine. It's pretty magical. And then, yeah, again, in the afternoons, you'd go out for a walk. If you'd found lion, you'd potentially go back and to see what they've been up to and see if they get up and move in the afternoons. Or you just go and explore that area. It's phenomenal. There's fantastic geology there. There's also paleontology. We've been and had a look at the dinosaur fossils there. There's fossilized trees. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on rather than even just wildlife. It's pretty interesting area.
Baobab trees too.
The baobab trees. I mean, the leopards and the lion, in particular, leopards use the baobabs as their lairs, and you'll go and you'll find all the skulls from animals that they've predated, they've hunted, they're all hidden inside these little lairs and things like that. It's pretty interesting. Yeah, very, very interesting place.
So to paint a picture, the river is not, the Tataki River is not very wide. What would it be, 20, 30 meters at that point, Andy?
Yeah.
Along one edge, the far edge, is a high bank with a big baobab tree on top of it, actually, if it's still there. It was busy falling into the river last time.
Yeah, no, it's still there.
And on this side is a thing called Croton megalobatrus. It's a large leaf tuberberry, big, thick leaf like this, and quite fleshy, so it provides really good shade. And that's why the camp is in there, because the Zimbabwe heat can be pretty unrelenting. So it's perfectly cool. And one of the moments I love about Tataki is you do your morning walking, and it's often very exciting. And then you come back for brunch. And then you take a deck chair, or you don't even need a deck chair, but you just put it on the sand, and the sand is quite damp and very cool. And you dig your feet in. You can walk barefoot in that camp all over the place. And you just dig your feet into the sand, and you sit in the chair, but you're in the shade. And these baboons are all around you just doing what they do. Fascinating animals to watch. But then the elephants. I don't know if I'm jumping the gun here.
No, please. Yeah, please. this is more about a joint story for me, because
Yeah.
like I said, it's like being in a documentary, and so much can be going on the whole time, and exactly that, you'd be sitting there, next thing a whole breeding herd, a whole family herd of elephants arrives, and it's and
what happens is the guys, the camp hands, they need water, and so they dig down into the sand, and then the sand filters in. It's perfectly clear water. It's the water we drink, perfectly clean, and it filters in, and it collects in a pool, and then they use it. They scoop it out, and then they cook with it, and even do a little bit of laundry and what have you. But the elephants, being no fools, also wander downstream following the water. Now, the water flows quite shallow. It's only an inch or two deep at most. Quite difficult for an elephant to suck with his trunk. And so the elephants dig holes themselves. They do exactly what humans do. But of course, if there's a hole there already, well, you don't need to dig one, right? So the elephants come and drink from the holes that the camp hands have made, and the hole's just 10 meters from camp. And so you sit there in the shade with a cup of coffee or a beer or a gin and tonic, and your camera and your binoculars, and these elephants, and we're talking about breeding herds, mothers with babies, and in large numbers, dozens and dozens of them, come down to drink there, and they are, how far, Andy? I'm not going to exaggerate, 5 meters from you?
Yeah, sometimes they come in as close as 5 meters. It's pretty overwhelming.
Yeah. So they block up the sun. They're close. They're completely aware you're there, obviously. And as long as you sit quietly and just go about your business, you can even talk to each other. And don't make any sudden movements. They are totally happy to have you there because they are under no threat. And it is the most awesome, mind-blowing, emotional experience to sit there in the presence of these massive animals and know that they're not afraid of you. And that, to me, defines Tataki.
100%. And what's special about that is that they know that those campsites are there, and there's never been any bad interaction. From what I know of the history of people I've spoken to in those areas, with those animals coming in, and they know that they're coming into an area where there's people, so it's their choice, it's their terms, and that's one of the reasons why they're particularly relaxed, is because they've been allowed to make that decision. They've chosen how close they want to come and actually drink water from you. You're not forcing them as humans into a situation. And that's the key thing with dealing with dangerous game and most animals, wildlife, in particular in vehicles, but especially on foot. Allow the big game, the dangerous stuff, to make the decisions. Don't force wildlife into it. And that's where these experiences come in like it. Exactly. Yeah. So it's very, very special.
One of the lessons that taught me, and I was sort of more dimly aware of it before as a guide, but most of my guiding had been from a Land Rover, which is a very safe space. Animals are not going to bother you when you're in a car. In fact, they're disinterested in you when you're in a vehicle. So, but when you're on foot, that can change. And one of the things that Andy showed me was that, and I'm talking about lions now in particular, Andy, but it's also true of elephants, is don't hide from them. Show yourself to them, let them see you, then they know what's going on, and then they will let you approach them to within a reasonable distance. But if you keep hiding away, sneaking about, which is what you think you'd have to do if you're tracking lions, then you're potentially running into trouble. And I'm thinking of that day that we walked out of Kavinga to Tataki, and we saw that pride with the babies in the riverbed. You remember?
Yeah. I think that was that group. There was about 22 of them.
Yeah, massive pride.
Yeah.
And they were off on our right as we crossed the river, and we saw them there. And slowly, over the space of, well, not that slow, 20 minutes maybe, approached, and they had little cubs with them, right?
Yeah.
And we approached to, I'd say, about 30 meters, and we sat down in the open on the burning sands, totally exposed so that they could see us. And then we sat with them for, well, as long as we chose.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the key things with in particular with lion, and one of the tricks I've learned with them over the years is body language. And it's how you approach. It's the same as how you walk up to an individual, even a human. You walk up square onto a person, they're going to feel very confronted and intimidated. So even with wildlife, I know in particular lion, because it's one animal I've chosen to work with a lot, is even when we're getting close into experiences, I will turn my body. The guests, I don't always do it, but I will, in particular, the person at the front, I will turn my body sideways and make myself non-confrontational. And it's amazing by doing that, how quickly you can settle them and actually get them to sit down and then carry on with their daily routine, start cleaning themselves or whatever it may be. And it's just, certainly in this business, there's absolutely no way of shortening your experiences and your exposure. With doing this stuff more and more, you learn a lot about what you do in the field, and there's no substitute for experience, that is for sure. I mean, I wouldn't expect people for their first or second time to go and jump out of a car and walk up the lines. You certainly got to be knowing what, know what you're doing, and make sure that you respect what you're doing as well, know your boundaries. So that brings me on to a little story. I don't know if you want me to carry on a little bit. With the one morning I remember with Charlie and Lily, and we had Claudia and her son, and we went out and we had heard lion calling out the back of the camp. And this was just an experience that I want to talk about in terms of human emotion. And we went out, we heard these lions, and we started picking up, and we found the tracks, and we're like, okay, let's go, let's follow these things. And off we go, following these tracks. And the next thing, we got to this little ridge. We'd been walking about 15 minutes, it wasn't long. We got to this little ridge, and it was in the open, but there was these little green bushes called shepherd's bushes and bossias. And lying in amongst them were these, I would say they're cubs, but they were more sort of sub-adults. They were probably 18 months, 2 years old. They were quite big. And these are the lions that we'd seen a couple of years prior to that, what Lloyd was talking about earlier with the cubs, the little guys running around. They'd grown up now. And now I'm looking for the mom. And the mom's name, we used to call her name was Sapi. And it's the one lioness that we'd actually worked a lot with and knew her really fairly well. Wild animals, you never know 100%. And that's one thing you must never forget as a guide, is that it's not a pet as much as you spent a lot of time with them. And I was looking for her because the cubs were pretty relaxed. We're probably, Lloyd, you correct me if I'm wrong, maybe 20 meters from them. We're pretty close on foot. And I was slowly walking to the side because I was having a look for this other lioness. And then literally 10 meters from just to my left here, there was a little growl. Well, I say a little growl, there was a roar, which is what lions often do. And we all sort of like jumped out of our skin a little bit because of the surprise. I did my little thing where I turned my body sideways, started talking to her, settled, got everybody to just move back slowly. And it was quite an emotional experience to see, because these cubs that we had seen were Sapi's last cubs that she had. She was a very, very old lioness. At that stage, she potentially was probably about 12, 13 years old. And you could actually see that she was, I don't know if you remember her, Lloyd, where she was starting to get really sort of weathered and tired.
She had on her face or her nose, didn't she?
She always had that grey nose. And as she got older, that became more and more pronounced. And it was just, you could see that she was struggling because these youngsters hadn't quite got the plan yet with hunting. And now she's trying to feed these 4 sub-adults basically, and then even herself. So you can imagine every time she caught something, they would come in and bully her, and because it was 1 against 4. So that got a bit tricky, with her, and she was starting to lose a little bit of condition. And I was standing there and we're just talking to the lion and just chatting about them and the dynamics and saying, do you remember these lions? Because I think Charlie and Lily and Claudia had seen them 2 years prior. And so we were catching up with them and saying, oh, do you remember them? And having a look at them. And thought, okay, well, let's leave them now. We don't want to disturb them more than what we've done. Let's leave them. We know where we are, and we'll start walking off. And we backed off slowly, and off we started walking. And then while we were walking, one of the ladies in the party started crying, and she was walking behind me.
Hey, Andy, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
I think you might have underplayed the barking and small dash you made towards us there.
Okay, well, maybe you can elaborate on that.
No, because you remember we'd seen her and then she had moved, right? And then when we came back, she had gone behind the termite mound, and we didn't know she was there.
Yeah.
We were trying to give her space, but we inadvertently were walking straight towards her, which is when she came barreling.
That's right. I forget.
Yeah.
The full. Yeah.
And then she barked at us because we're walking towards her. We didn't know that. Didn't mean to.
Yeah, exactly.
So when a lion rushes at you like that, and it wasn't, look, it's always menacing, but I mean, she was just giving us a fair warning. It certainly stops you in your tracks. And if you're not used to it, which you are and I am, but those Swiss clients, certainly not. That's not happening in their little village with the cows and the bells.
No.
So it gets your attention. It focuses your attention.
Yeah. So I just want to make this clear. When we go walking in the bush, it's not about trying to get animals to charge us to make everybody jump out of their skins. It's about having these amazing, close, intimate experiences. Like Lloyd mentioned, ethics is a big thing with me, and obviously, but like there, inadvertently, we were now walking exactly towards that lioness, unintentionally, and then she's going to do what she needs to do. She's being a mom. She's a good mom, being protective, and she's going to tell us to back off. So that's what she did. But and that happens in the bush. Quite a lot on foot, actually. So you got to have your wits about you. So now this experience had happened, and now that's when we carried on. And so suddenly, one of the ladies was now crying, and I'm going, oh no, I've totally blown this. Because I'll ask my guests, I'll say to them, listen, if you're not comfortable, tell me that you're not comfortable and that you're not happy. If we're walking in, I explain everything that's going on, what experiences we're having, what most likely the individual is going to do, the reactions, and walk everybody through it so that people are as comfortable as possible. But some people, like you said, Lloyd, they used to their normal lives back home, and this is just totally out of most people's normal daily routine. So it can be very, very overwhelming. And I thought, what I've done now is I've actually pushed the boundary too much, and I've upset the ladies in the group, and everybody's upset. And I'm like now walking, and I'm turning back. Eventually, turn around, and I say to Claudia, was the lady's name, and I said to her, "Are you okay?" And she was behind her sunglasses, just going, "Yeah, I'm fine." And I'm like, "Okay, well, we're just going to carry on a little bit. Are you happy to carry on walking?" And she's like, "Absolutely, no problem." And I'm just like, it's playing in my mind now. I'm like, I've absolutely made this lady hate this entire experience of walking in Africa. Like, I've just ruined this experience. And we walk for the morning, and then we get back to camp. We go and walk it off a bit, get back to camp at about 9, I think it was about 11ish actually, a little bit later in the day. And then the next thing, the waterworks open properly in camp, and there's hugging, and everybody's crying, and the whole group is now all hugging each other. And I'm just going, I don't know what I've done. I really don't know what I've done.
You and I just looked at each other in astonishment. We didn't know what the hell was going on.
Yeah, we just didn't know what was going on. And then eventually it was like, no, what it is that Claudia had a very emotional experience with one of her children. And none of us were privy to that. Even yourself, Lloyd, you'd guided them many years and not known this.
Well, she had lost her child, unfortunately.
And the hardships of this lioness bringing up the cubs just hit home for her. And it was this emotional journey that it allowed her to release. And it was one of the first times the family had actually ever seen her release on this. So these experiences for me in the bush, it's not only about going and tracking the big game on foot in those wildernesses experiences. That's amazing, but it's the journeys that people actually get to enjoy and experience, and the comfort zones that get pushed a little bit. And for me, it's something that's always stuck with me. And I mean, that was about 6 or 7 years ago, if not longer. And I remember that emotional part of that safari so much, and how empowering that was, just that experience. And I find it phenomenal, those experiences that we get. So you can imagine, once they explained what was going on, I felt hugely relieved that I actually hadn't completely ruined this entire safari about the approaching of wildlife on foot, and it was more the attachment of emotion and things like that that had actually come out, and it's fantastic to see that in people on these journeys.
Yeah, and she's I don't know if that was her first safari with us. It might have been, but she's been on at least 4 now.
Yeah.
And she brought out her husband and both of her sons and her son's boyfriends, and one of those, Andy, they just had a young child.
Yes. Yeah.
Norbert's daughter, Norbert's another one is there. We're all part of the family now, mate.
Yeah. Claudia messaged me and told me. So he told me like a week ago. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. We're all enmeshed. And so Andy and I would have been doing a walk like that in May once again. Didn't happen this time, but it's certainly going to keep on going. And that scary experience for her was it was a release and something that she wants more of.
Yes. Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about, so Andy he started to tell you a little bit about Predator's Playground. And for those of you who would like to get an idea of what Tataki looks like, the countryside there and the way the wildlife behaves, it'd be good if you could get hold of that. A DVD sounds like such an old-fashioned technology these days, but I find it.
Yeah, the best way would be to try and Google search it and type in Predator's Playground. The movie itself was actually originally purchased by the Natural History Unit in Cape Town, and then it was distributed to Animal Planet and Nat Geo Wild. So it's done its rounds around the world, and we produced the movie in 2012. It's been on and off over the years. It just comes on, goes off. I don't know what happens. Once these big sort of foundations or whatever you want to call them, they take over these films. They start running it whenever they need to. I don't know the exact mechanics of it. If you really like some copies, I can get some copies made for people and actually get them. I can either give them to Lloyd, and then it's easier to post from overseas. We've done that before for people, or I can try and get you. Well, the best thing would be come and experience it, but would be
get hold of you, Andy, if they want to.
It's going to say get hold of me direct, and then I can try and get some copies to you somehow.
I have got copies, but they're in South Africa, and it's a little bit tricky getting there at the moment. But Janine's just said in the chat box that sometimes it's on Nat Geo Wild, so it obviously still comes up from time to time.
Yeah.
Have you
so
go ahead.
I see, would anyone like my email address? Should I give it to people, or do I write it on the chat? I'm not that savvy.
I think just type it into the chat box there. It's the easiest thing. Have you ever had an experience out there or on any of your other safaris where you questioned the wisdom of walking with wild animals?
On many occasions when I've been out in the bush, when you're on foot, it's just such a different experience to being in a vehicle that I've learned over the years to trust. I call it a sixth sense. Try and be in tune, trying to use your natural skills as much as possible and get in tune with your environments. I've had phenomenal experiences in Gonorrhea, a national park that I've walked quite a bit with Lloyd now as well, which is a very wild, remote national park in the southeastern part of Zimbabwe. And the elephants there are notorious for being absolutely crazy because of the history that happened down in that part of the world. We obviously went through a civil war here, and all sorts of things that happened in that particular part of the world where elephants got persecuted. And the one thing I found there with walking with those elephants is on foot is they're a lot more relaxed with people like that than actually in vehicles or any other mechanical means of getting around. So walking in some areas can be a lot more beneficial than actually driving around. Obviously the downside is you don't always get to go as far or travel as far as you may want to get to another point, but it's the experiences that you do while you're walking, that crunching of the leaves underneath your feet, your senses are heightened, your smell, you're suddenly looking through the bushes and trying to not look at the bushes and pick up things. And it's just, yeah, it's amazing. You really get in tune and you get that gut feeling. So yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's very special experiences.
And yeah, Adrian, it sounds funny. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, it's blurring a little bit, but it's okay.
Okay. Adrian says that he found it on Vimeo while we've been talking, the movie.
Okay.
And Janine says it's still available on Vimeo, just for everybody's interest. So you can, I thoroughly recommend you have a look at that. Folks, one of the things about walking is, and by the way, walking doesn't have to be a hardcore experience where you're carrying a heavy pack. In fact, we never carry a heavy pack. We carry a light day pack with food and water, and a first aid kit, and a bear banger if we get into trouble. And Andy always carries a rifle, which I've never seen him use. So as a client, you're just walking there with your water, basically. And we walk for 4 or 5 hours, maybe at most, but it's very slow. And we stop in the shade all the time. We sip water. And then either we end up back at camp or we end up being picked up by a vehicle, because we're always in radio contact. So it's a safe experience. This is not a hardcore Marines kind of experience. And the thing about it too is it has to be slow, because otherwise you can't pay attention. If you just, Andy, what's the biggest size group you walk with? 8, 6?
Yeah, I've learned over the years that I can deal with groups of up to 8. Typically smaller groups are a bit better, just because you can be a little bit, it's easier to communicate, and it's just a little bit more of an intimate experience. The more people you have, and often walking, you're not in these big open areas all the time, so you can be walking through thick bush, and so definitely smaller groups are easier to deal with.
They're more controllable. The thing about being on foot is that I think you said that your senses are heightened, and that's the primal thing for me. Is it feels, I don't know if edgy is the right word, but you're certainly paying attention, because there's stuff out there, and you're on even terms now with buffaloes, and they might jump out of a donga or from behind a tree, or behind a baobab tree, or a lion might pop up from behind a termite mound, and you actually never know. And typically the animals know that you're coming before you see them. But sometimes, and this has happened actually, if you spend as many hours in the bush walking as Andy has, you're going to have an experience where something unexpected happens. And that's why these groups tend to be small, and controllable. And that feeling of never quite knowing what awaits around the corner of the path or over the next rise is what makes walking safaris so exciting. It feels, I don't even know, I don't think nervous describes it, but there's a different edge to it, isn't there?
Yeah, 100%. You know what it is, Lloyd? What I've learned over the years is that I've found that it allows people just to be people, and it doesn't matter. And I don't want to be offending anyone by saying this or anything like that, but don't get worried. Is that it doesn't matter the experiences that you have there. It doesn't matter whether you have $1 in your pocket or $1 billion. It is an amazing leveler, and it just allows you to just get in touch with everything out there. You're out on foot. You're suddenly like, okay, I'm not calling the shots anymore, or I'm not being told what to do anymore. And this is really, really exactly. It just gets your senses, everything just going, and allows you just to get these different experiences. It's
one
phenomenal.
of the other things, Andy, that you do, which I really enjoy, is the fact is that that whole Mana area hasn't always been a national park. And it was populated by villagers over, the millennia. Those people were moved out to create a national park, but the evidence of their villages is still there if you know what to look for. And Andy's good at pointing that out. And we're forever coming across shards of pottery and arrowheads and evidence that they grazed their cattle and lived a hard life, which adds another aspect to the safari. And those people lived amongst lions and buffaloes and hippos and crocodiles and elephants, didn't they? Are you there?
Yeah. Sorry, I was just looking at the chats. I'm trying to get techno savvy, eh? I'm a bushman, eh?
So the human context also is really for me a very interesting part of walking at Tataki and at minor pools in general.
Yeah, no, definitely 100%. And minor pools is very unique like that and special. And there are other places around Africa that you can do it. But Zimbabwe, and that's the one thing that Zimbabwe has been really, really great to do that is getting out on foot. And that's one thing that we're very fortunate that we're allowed to do, is that once we trained in this country, we primarily look at walking safaris, as that's what our major qualification. And it's amazing. So we get to go and guide in all these different national parks. I mean, so Lloyd and I have done safaris in Wangi National Park in the north and the south. We've done safaris in Matusodana National Park. Last year we did one in southern end of Chisarira National Park, Minor Pools National Park. We've done on the back end of the park, Tataki, and on the floodplain. And we've walked quite extensively in Gonorrhea National Park. So we've covered quite a few different national parks in the country, and they all unique in their own right, and they're special. They're really, really special. But it's that ability to be walking, and places like Gonorrhea, if I can touch on that, is some of those wildlife trails that you walk there, those elephant trails up and down those spectacular Chalocho cliffs, have been there for thousands of years. You suddenly walking on this trail that has a dip in it because it's been walked on so many times by animals, and in particular elephant, you feel like you're walking in history. It's, Africa doesn't have that same history as Europe and other places with old buildings and things like that. Africa's pretty recent. But what we do have are those ancient game trails and the historical sites of these beautiful wilderness areas, which are phenomenal to experience. And doing that on foot is unbelievable, to be walking on this trail, and especially places like Gonorrhea. And because it's quite a new park open to tourism, you're like, when you're walking on this trail, you can turn around and be like, geez, we're probably one of maybe 100 people who've walked on this trail in the last 20 years. It's special. Really, really is special. That is unique. Finding remote wild places now is really, really unique.
Yeah. So despite all the Zimbabwe political situation, would it be right to say that those wild areas remain to this day pretty much untouched and unaffected by the politics? Pretty much.
Yeah, we've been very lucky. One thing that has happened is that the national parks fall under the national sort of trust and a state of the country. So there was no political attachment to those national parks. So there was no need to be disruptive with them. There has been on the fringes of the national parks, you can imagine, with increased populations of people, habitat degradation, that you do get elements of people coming in to do subsistence poaching, obviously trying to feed their families. You can imagine our economy has been the most stable one for the last 20 years. So you can't blame people wanting to come in and obviously try and feed their families and support themselves and survive. The problem that does come in that leads on from that is that it can potentially, it's a vulturistic opportunity where it can be the guy catches 2 warthogs instead of 1, and then it turns into slight subsistence commercial poaching, which I would say that's the height of what's happened. We did have some issues a few years ago where elephant numbers were getting targeted and from poaching. That the nice thing is that our national parks, with a bunch of sort of private organizations, jumped onto that very, very quickly and have stabilized a lot of that. So we have pretty stable national parks, which has been phenomenal. So yeah, it's a privilege. We're very lucky.
One last question for you. Beyond and outside of Zimbabwe, where is your favorite place to go on safari?
The one place that has touched my heart, and it's thanks to you, Lloyd, is Namibia. I absolutely love the desert adaptability of animals and the harshness of that environment, and that whole uniqueness of that fog coming in and going out, and those crystal clear skies. I mean, I often think about that time when we slept on top of the Brandberg and we were we're looking up at the stars, and I was just like, I've never, even in on top of Lake Kariba, where it's supposed to be nice and clear, have I seen so many stars in my life. Was one thing that certainly touched a special place in my heart. Namibia is stunning, and I've been a few times now, and I've, thanks to Lloyd, covered a lot of the ground there, all the way from the area I was talking about earlier, Palmwag, all the way up to the Hornib area, and then I've even been down to the sort of Namibbrand and Sossusvlei areas, and it's beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
Okay, Andy, listen, we had a question earlier from Shane. We're going back to the baboons at Tataki. How come just by accident at some stage one of them hasn't, just through sheer curiosity, picked up a piece of bread or fruit or something and eaten it and went, hey,
okay, so
I'll have more?
Yeah, that has happened, but for some reason it hasn't turned into a trait. It hasn't developed. I did find on the one time on a safari, I found a spoon that had been stolen, and I was like, yeah, these baboons, I can these things have run off with a spoon into the bush, and I found it, and I was like, is this the start? And it is a worry that I don't lose sleep over it, but when I'm there, I definitely go, I wonder when and how long this is going to last. And for some reason, it has just not happened. The states haven't done it. I don't know what it is.
So I've read stories where we deal with baboons and monkey trips and hyenas, of course, that have moved into camp, and you'll recall those stories, and it was all our own fault, and they became a bit of a menace, and it's embarrassing. But it's just a phenomenal thing. There's another question from Faz and Faiz. They're asking, this is to both of us actually, have you got a place you've yet to go to? Have you got a place you have not been to that you would like to go to? I think that's the question.
Yeah, there's a lot of places. There's a lot of places. The one place that particularly for me, if you don't mind me starting, Lloyd, is I would definitely, a couple. One is Central Kalahari. I'd like to go and have a look at that. I've been quite intrigued, just again, at the remoteness and the wilderness of it. One of the other big experiences that I'd like to do, and I'm going to be doing it next year, I've got a nice safari up in East Africa, is I've never done the migration, which is one thing that I've always been told to do. So I've been very fortunate in many years that I've kept really busy in the southern part of Africa, but obviously I've been branching out now. Next year I'm going to East Africa, and then a couple of years ago, actually, I did a phenomenal safari. I went to Zakuma in Chad, and that was unbelievable. Lloyd, you and I have spoken about that. That was potentially one of my other highlights of my 20-odd year career in this industry.
I agree. So that's my bucket list of Zakuma and Chad. It's run by Africa Parks, which is a private organization. Unfortunately, the focus is on conservation, but it's extremely expensive to get to and to stay at, which is a drawback. It's by no means mainstream, but they're doing an incredible job. And so that's my answer too, Faz, is Zakuma. We've got another question actually from Carmen, but I'm going to direct this to Grant Nell because he is sitting right there in Botswana. Grant, Carmen's saying, what are your thoughts again on the elephant situation in Botswana, the sudden deaths, and and how's the Botswana government reacting to that?
I'll try and shed some light for you. I don't know if I'm on mute still.
No, you're good.
Okay, I'm good. I'll try and shed some light. So there was actually a meeting here in Kasane yesterday. They came up to see everybody, to see that the researchers here. They have absolutely no idea what's causing the deaths. They have done necropsies. They have done samples. They have taken just about every part of the body. They've examined, and everything is either coming up inconclusive or negative. So it doesn't seem to be any poaching. All the tusks are in place. The deaths were originally centered around a place called Saronga, but it sort of moved out a little bit further. I think we're up to 400 and something dead elephants at the moment, which is quite alarming. And yeah, nobody really knows. So they came up here yesterday to drop off some samples that are going to go over to Virginia Tech in United States. And hopefully with their very fancy equipment, they might be able to shed some light. Unfortunately, the Botswana government's been a little bit reticent in giving that information out. There was a press release today, but it's just their way. They don't tell anybody anything, and it always makes everybody think that there's something nefarious going on. But at this stage, they are flummoxed. And that's not just one or two people, it's a whole bunch of scientists are actually flummoxed at the moment. So we're hoping whatever we pick up from VT, any information we get from them will shed some light on what the story is.
Okay, yeah, it's you never quite. It's on BBC at the moment. It seems to be featured and then refeatured over the last couple of days, and everybody seems to be picking it up. It's incredible, the power of social media. People keep sending it to me, and I read it on the BBC the other day, and it keeps appearing on Facebook again and again. So, and there's definitely a feeling that the government's hiding something, although that may not be true.
Yeah, no, it's not true. They're really trying hard. They've actually got a whole task force they've put together with the head vet from DWNP, with outside scientists. They're spending a hell of a lot of money on it. So I'm not actually sure, you know, their problem is that they don't speak to anybody. They keep everything quiet. I feel that they should be more open with it, let everybody know, and then we wouldn't have these speculation reports from organizations like BBC. And BBC have actually they don't have a very good relationship with the Botswana government because they do a little bit of selective reporting that's got up the Botswana government's nose. And so the BBC and Botswana government don't actually see eye to eye very well. And the government's also had they've been stung a few times by media, so they're a bit reluctant to share stuff, which is, I think, a bit silly. They should be more open about, especially something like this.
Okay. What's the thing we all want to know desperately, of course, is when Botswana is going to open up again? Any news?
Nothing at this stage. No, nothing. Our borders are still closed, so we're not hearing anything from anybody. The government hasn't said anything. We might open borders with Namibia and maybe Zimbabwe in the near future. But yeah, definitely not with South Africa. In fact, we're repatriating a whole bunch of truck drivers that keep being tested positive at the border, and then they get repatriated back to South Africa. So yeah, at this stage, we don't know.
Okay.
Like everybody else, we just hurry up and wait, Right. It's like the military. Yeah.
Thanks, Grant.
No worries.
Thank you very much. There's a question from Shane where he says, aside from those Ellie deaths, was there a resurgence in the poaching during the forced pandemic lockdown periods in Botswana and Zim? So actually, this is to Andrew as well. Now, let's go back to Andrew, actually. Has there been any effect?
Yeah, there has, in particular, not so much in the non-consumptive areas, but certainly in the consumptive. Because you're not having the guys out on the field and covering the ground as much, and often those areas are what we'd call buffer zones between national parks and communities. Because of the desperation of our economy, and then obviously the lack of now tourism in those particular areas, it has put immense pressure on the anti-poaching units, where they would have been assisted potentially by safari operators moving around in those areas. So definitely there has been some issues from that side. The national park side, the non-consumptive areas, not so much. Again, like I said a little bit earlier, is more subsistence stuff, but that's more of an economy-based thing rather than the virus actually causing any issues here. So just also to Grant, to go on to Zim's thing, the Cabinet Parliament had a meeting end of June, sorry. So officially, we're going to be opening our national parks in the next day or two, which is great for us in terms of local tourism. And there are international carriers coming into Zim, like Ethiopian, and there's a couple of airlines. However, the problem we still have, and like most countries, is that we have quarantine. We're not having anybody really traveling here, internationally, even regionally. I mean, South Africa, we're supposed to have a bunch of guests come up now. There's no ways. They're in tight lockdown like you guys are in Botswana.
Andy, do you think that there's been no tourist footprint out there has been of benefit to the wildlife in any way in these last 3 to 4 months?
Do you know what I think it has, to be honest? The pressures, they probably, if I could tap into that animal world like I would love to, I bet you they probably have been nice, and this has been fantastic this year. Especially seasonal parks in particular, like places like the Zambezi Valley, Mana Pools, where I do feel that every year there's a rehabilitation process that goes with us, the guides and the wildlife, and even just the day-to-day tourist that goes into the parks, have been left alone this year. So I do believe that this year the animals are probably also going, what the hell's going on? There's nobody bothering us, Yeah, I do believe that they've probably benefited from tourism pressure, because in some areas it's not that well managed.
Grant, have you experienced that in your solo trips into the Chobe?
No, actually, the wildlife in the Chobe seems to be behaving just as usual. And it's quite funny because we have times when you'll be driving around there and you are the only vehicle. I don't think I've ever done that before. I spent 2 days in Savuti driving around there and I didn't see another vehicle, but the wildlife behaved pretty much as it normally behaves. I think it's really, really habituated, and they just say, oh, I wonder where you've been.
Is that because you were lost, Grant, driving around like that without seeing anyone?
Don't tell everybody.
The Chobe area is normally so busy, and I just, I just wondered.
Well, I think, one of the things that we had noticed in the Chobe is that the lions hunt almost exclusively at night because there's no cars around. It's almost impossible for them to hunt during the day normally, because it's so busy that a pride of lions has got a herd of vehicles around it at any one point during the day. So the lions do nothing. And you usually find them in the morning on a kill. So they hunt almost exclusively at night. And now, there are reports, the one I saw, which I think you might have seen the picture of them taking that kudu from a crocodile, that would never have happened in the daytime previously. And it was interesting to see that there was not a single vehicle there. Very lucky to have seen that. So that's about the only thing that's changed. And I think the river's got a break from the lack of boats. So I think we're going to have a much better bird life this year, better breeding, and better fish stocks, which obviously ramps up to every other animal along the food chain.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Good. I've just got another message. Is Shane the only person who knows how to type? He sent another message. He says that our friend Leon van Wyk, 57 Pundu, went into the Kruger National Park with guests today. Took some people on a game drive. So that's why he's not here this evening. But what's lovely about that is that it means that, he's working and we'll getting back slowly into what we do. Folks, are there any other questions before we conclude here this evening?
Lloyd, I saw one now that I've managed to work out how the messaging works. Is Janine wrote a question right at the beginning of the discussion about Kavinga and water and Tataki. Okay. So something I wanted to clear up, and it's a big misconception that's been put out there with this area that's been developed. So Kavinga Safari Camp is a private concession on the Rakomachi River, and there's another dry river that comes in, an arterial river, onto the Rakomachi to its right, to the east, and then further to the east is the Tataki, which comes down, feeds into the Rakomachi downstream. Now, there's been this big sort of feeling that with Kavinga, they've got a pan in front of their camp that they pump just out of a shallow well with solar that they push into this pan in the front of the camp. And it's believed that what happened is they were drawing all the wildlife from Tataki across to Kavinga itself. Now, in some ways that is true. I do believe that. that they have drawn the wildlife. My main thought for that, though, my main belief behind why a lot of wildlife was coming around was not so much that there was more water available for them. It's that that area with a presence was a safe area. The back of the national park 10 years ago, when Kavinga first started developing, was very, very heavily elephant poached. It was poaching elephant almost on a daily basis. So what happened is a lot of wildlife, now there was a presence of this photographic area. That we were picking up spoor of people on foot all the time, and that presence of not having, of having tourists in an area obviously deters that, and animals learn. It's amazing how quickly they learn what a safe and unsafe zone is. And for my belief, it's more definitely the safety rather than a water-based issue. Now, taking water away from Tataki, it can't happen. The Tataki Spring is 9 kilometers away as the crow flies to the east, and that river feeds in downstream of where Kavinga is. It's not upstream. So if you get what I mean, the water's not going to flow upstream from that. So it's definitely not a factor of water being drawn from there. There's something else going on there. I don't know if it's to do with a lot of those rivers that come in at the back of the park. They get a lot of sediment and soil coming in from the farming upstream, and that potentially could be just sediment-based stuff that's actually just layering those riverbeds and covering the water table, not allowing it to be exposed as much. So I hope that answers your question from that point of view of the wildlife and the water dynamics in that area.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, folks, just to conclude, and I want to say thanks to Andy. It's been a tremendous privilege to walk with Andy and to be on safari with him many times, and we're going to continue. What I haven't said is that during this lockdown, Andy's been spending a lot of time actually in the national parks doing training of young Zimbabwean guides. And people like Grant and me and Shane and Andy and others on this forum here, white males, we do this thing because we absolutely love it. But the future of conservation really lies with Black Africans taking responsibility and showing interest in wildlife just for its own sake, rather than as a money resource. And so engendering of an actual love of wildlife and wild places amongst that generation is important, because the wildlife has its own intrinsic value. And so what Andy does is he, Andy, you tell us what you do. I'm not going to put words in your mouth.
Okay. Well, I've got one of the students, past students on the group, actually, Faisal, who's who's been on one of the training courses, and Farai, Jessica in the background there.
Oh, brilliant.
So what we've done in Zimbabwe, we have an association, and what we've learned over the years is that our training is mainly a mentorship based training, and we haven't been putting enough into exactly what you're talking about, our next generation. So what's happened over the last sort of 7 years, we've developed these programs. We run some training courses, and then we've also just heightened our mentorship with the apprentices that we mentor. And basically what we'll do is we'll try and run anything from courses that will cater for students of any age who are familiar or want to love and learn about the bush. And it's normally about a week to 10 days long, typically a week. And we'll try and hold it in one of the remote areas around Zimbabwe. And we normally have, it's amazing, the group course started maybe with probably 12, 13 people. And now we're turning people away. We oversubscribed. We have 30 to 40 candidates every year that come on that particular week. So we're looking to expand it, obviously to try and make sure that everybody gets the best benefit of this. And then engaging a lot of the professionals around the country, guys in Wangi National Park, the surrounding areas. And we're dealing with both sectors of this industry, which is the non-consumptive as well as the consumptive side. Because in Zimbabwe, we have both sectors are quite big here, and we need it to be worked in unison and to make sure that everybody's engaging and we're all on the same page in what direction we want to be going in. So it's huge. Lecturing on anything from herpetology to astronomy to geology, to big game on foot tracking, anatomy, to basically, all sorts of different aspects is what we cover. Typical day in a life as a guide, mechanics, whatever you want to cover.
Yeah, and that's driven by private sector.
Yeah, so
Private sector funding.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, all right. We'll call it a day there, folks. I'd like to say thank you very much for tuning in. As you know, we did this for 11 or 12 weeks in a row from March, and now we've moved it to a monthly basis. It'll be the second Thursday of every month. So whatever date that is next month, let's have a quick look. That will be the 6th of August.